December 26, 1944. Monte Belvedere, Northern Apennines, Italy. Through morning fog, Oberst Heinrich von Schellenberg watched American troops advancing toward his fortress. "Negroes," his briefing officer had reported with contempt. "The Americans have sent us their weakest troops." Former railroad porters playing soldier. Von Schellenberg, a Stalingrad veteran, studied the men through field glasses. The 370th Infantry Regiment, part of the U.S. Army's 92nd Infantry Division, an all-black unit in a segregated army sent to assault the most formidable German defensive position in Italy, the Gothic Line. Wehrmacht propaganda had prepared German soldiers to expect quick surrender from black American troops. Nazi racial theories declared African soldiers inherently inferior in combat, lacking discipline and courage for sustained fighting. What von Schellenberg didn't know was that marching toward his mountain fortress were men who had endured challenges no German soldier could imagine. They had fought racism in their own army, trained with inadequate equipment, and served under officers who expected them to fail. They carried a burden heavier than their packs, the weight of representing an entire race to a world that doubted them. Within 48 hours, von Schellenberg would send an urgent message to Field Marshal Kesselring's headquarters, a message that would force German commanders to reassess everything they believed about racial combat capabilities. The Germans had laughed, but the laughter died in the mountains. This is the story of how the Buffalo Soldiers of World War II transformed from objects of derision into the sledgehammer that cracked the Gothic Line. Subscribe to the channel if you never want to miss stories like this. Most people don't know this history exists. Help us change that. The 92nd Infantry Division activated in October 1942 at Fort Huachuca, Arizona. 15,000 black soldiers organized into 4 infantry regiments. Their shoulder patch bore a black buffalo, honoring the legendary Buffalo Soldiers of the Frontier Army. But pride couldn't overcome systematic obstacles. The U.S. Army remained rigidly segregated. Black soldiers lived in separate barracks, ate in separate mess halls, and trained under predominantly white officers, many from southern states where segregation was law. Private First Class Vernon Baker later recalled, "Some officers made it clear they expected us to fail. They told us directly that colored soldiers couldn't fight, couldn't lead, couldn't handle combat pressure. We trained twice as hard to prove them wrong, knowing we'd get half the credit." Training at Fort Huachuca proved brutal. Temperatures exceeded 110 degrees in Arizona's desert. Yet the division received inferior equipment, World War I surplus rifles, limited ammunition, the worst vehicles. Staff Sergeant Edward A. Carter Jr. wrote, "They give us the oldest rifles, the worst trucks, and officers who've never seen combat. Then they wonder why we're not ready. But we'll be ready. We have to be." The Buffalo Soldiers also faced racism beyond their posts. Towns near Fort Huachuca enforced strict segregation. Black soldiers in uniform were refused service at restaurants where German prisoners of war ate freely. The contradiction burned, fighting for freedom abroad while denied basic dignity at home. By June 1944, the division received deployment orders for Italy's Gothic Line, 200 miles of fortifications that Field Marshal Kesselring had spent 2 years building. The line incorporated 2,376 machine gun nests, 479 anti-tank positions, 120,000 meters of barbed wire, and extensive minefields. The Buffalo Soldiers would face this barrier with inadequate artillery support, inconsistent air coverage, and the burden of knowing that failure would confirm every racist stereotype. German propaganda already mocked their deployment. Wehrmacht intelligence dismissed black American troops as third-rate soldiers suitable only for labor duties. The division arrived in Naples in July 1944. General Edward M. Almond commanded, a Virginian whose racial attitudes were well documented. He openly doubted his soldiers' capabilities and maintained relationships with officers who shared his prejudices. Staff Sergeant Johnny Stevens recalled, "General Almond told us we had to prove ourselves, that people were watching. What he didn't say, but we all heard, was that he expected us to fail. That made us more determined than any pep talk could have." By December 1944, Allied commanders faced crisis. The Gothic Line remained unbroken despite months of attacks. Winter approached. General Mark Clark needed a breakthrough before snow made mountain warfare impossible. The mission given to the 92nd Infantry Division: assault the western anchor of the Gothic Line, capture mountain peaks dominating the Serchio Valley, and drive German forces back. Success would open the door to northern Italy. Failure would mean another winter of stalemate and confirmation of every racist assumption about black soldiers. The centerpiece of German defenses was Monte Belvedere, rising 3,830 feet above the Serchio Valley. From its summit, German observation posts could see 50 miles in every direction, calling artillery fire on any movement with devastating accuracy. Oberst von Schellenberg, commanding the 148th Grenadier Division, had supervised construction personally. Concrete bunkers with 3-foot walls protected machine gun crews. Mortars sat in covered pits invisible to aerial reconnaissance. The mountains multiplied German effectiveness. A single machine gun could control an entire valley. Lieutenant Hans Becker wrote to his wife, "The Americans would need wings to reach us. The slopes are so steep that climbing without enemy fire would be difficult. Under fire, I cannot imagine how they could advance. The Negro troops they're sending will die before they reach our wire." German intelligence on the 92nd Infantry Division reflected Nazi racial prejudices. A November 1944 assessment stated, "American Negro units lack combat motivation. They will advance until meeting serious resistance, then retreat or surrender. Division is suitable only for defensive operations or garrison duties." This wasn't based on combat observation. It reflected Nazi ideology that declared non-Aryans inherently inferior. Wehrmacht training manuals advised, "Offer strong initial resistance. Negro troops will panic and flee. Their white officers will be unable to restore order." These assumptions created dangerous overconfidence. Von Schellenberg positioned forces believing black troops would collapse under artillery fire, never reaching his main defensive line. The Gothic Line's fortifications included S-mines, bouncing Bettys, that jumped 3 feet before exploding at groin height. Barbed wire obstacles, some 30 feet deep, forced attackers into killing zones. German defenders had registered every approach route with artillery. Weather became a German ally. November temperatures ranged from 40 degrees during the day to below freezing at night. Rain fell constantly, turning trails to mud. Morning fog prevented air support. Trench foot became epidemic. The 92nd's medical reports showed 847 cases serious enough for evacuation in November alone. Allied artillery and air support proved inadequate. Ammunition shortages plagued Italian operations. The 92nd received only 30% of requested ammunition, while priority went to France. Air support averaged fewer than 10 sorties daily compared to 100 plus in Northwest Europe. The Buffalo soldiers studied their objective, knowing they would assault with inadequate preparation. They would attack at numerical parity against prepared defenses, no 3-to-1 superiority that doctrine required. Success depended on courage, determination, and accepting casualties that would horrify commanders who valued their soldiers equally. But these soldiers weren't valued equally. They knew it. The Germans knew it. Failure would confirm every racist assumption. That burden was heavier than the equipment they carried. December 26, 1944. H hour, 0600. The attack would begin in darkness, on ice-covered slopes, against an enemy expecting them to fail. December 26th, 05:45 hours. Absolute darkness on Monte Belvedere's lower slopes. Men of Company C, 370 Infantry Regiment, checked equipment one final time. Every man carried 60 pounds up slopes where mountain goats struggled. Staff Sergeant Carter whispered final instructions. Stay low until artillery stops. Watch for mines. When we reach the wire, Bangalore torpedoes go first. Follow me through. If I go down, the next man takes over. We keep moving until we reach the top, or we're all dead. At 0600, American artillery opened fire. 2,400 rounds in 15 minutes, the maximum allowed. In his command bunker, von Schellenberg smiled. Only 15 minutes? The Americans are weaker than we thought. The Negro troops are coming. When artillery stopped, 30 seconds of silence. Then American voices shouted, "Move out!" and the Buffalo Soldiers began their climb. The slopes averaged 45-degree angles, steep enough that soldiers grabbed vegetation and rocks to pull themselves upward. Some sections exceeded 60 degrees. Men carried rifles slung, needing both hands to climb. Combat loads became torturous after 100 yards of vertical ascent. Private James Hendricks described it. You'd climb 10 steps and need to rest, gasping. Your legs burned. Your shoulders ached. You knew if you stopped too long, you'd never start again. So you climbed, one step at a time, listening for the sound that meant Germans spotted you, machine guns opening fire. That sound came at 6:23. German MG-42s firing 1,000